The Hells Angels biker saw the little girl blocking her mother from a blow, and his retaliation shook the block. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a cold, overcast evening in the heart of a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen. But that night, something would shake the whole block. Jason Reaper Thompson, a Hells Angels biker, was riding his Harley-Davidson through the winding streets, the familiar hum of his engine a constant companion. He had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to the solace of his garage. His leather jacket flapped against the wind. His thoughts were lost in the hum of the bike, when suddenly, the distant sound of a scream cut through the air. He hesitated for only a moment before following the sound, his instincts kicking in. He turned the corner, and there, in front of a modest house, was the scene he couldn't ignore. A man, drunk and raging, was standing over a woman, his arm raised to strike her. But it wasn't just the woman who caught his attention. A small girl, no more than 8 or 9, was standing between them, her tiny body stretched wide, her arms outstretched as if she could somehow shield her mother from the violence. The sight hit Reaper like a ton of bricks. The girl's bravery stunned him, and it made something inside him stir. Without thinking, he killed the engine and jumped off his bike, striding toward the chaos. The man didn't notice him at first, too consumed by his anger, but the girl saw Reaper's approach. Her wide, terrified eyes locked onto him, and for a split second, she froze, thinking he might be just as dangerous as the man threatening her mother. "Please don't hurt us," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain that had begun to fall. Her fear was palpable, but it didn't stop her from standing her ground. Reaper's heart sank as he saw the pain in her eyes. He could see the bruises already beginning to form on her mother's arms. In that moment, all the coldness he had built up over the years melted away. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently, kneeling down in front of the little girl, his hand hovering just inches from her. "I'm here to make sure you're both safe." The girl looked up at him, still unsure, but something in his voice calmed her. Reaper stood slowly and turned to face the man, his voice now cold and commanding. "You don't want to do this," he said, his words carrying the weight of someone who had seen far too much violence in his life. The man's drunken gaze met his, and for a moment, there was hesitation. Then, with a snarl, he swung his arm toward Reaper. But he wasn't fast enough. Reaper grabbed the man's arm, twisting it behind his back with ease, slamming him to the ground with a force that echoed through the street. The block went silent, as the residents peeked out from their windows, witnessing the retaliation that would be talked about for years. The girl's mother, still in shock, stumbled backward, her eyes wide with disbelief. Reaper didn't say a word. He just turned back to the girl and her mother, his eyes softening. "You're safe now," he said, helping the woman to her feet. The girl, who had been holding her breath, finally exhaled, her small shoulders relaxing. For the first time that night, the tension in the air seemed to dissipate. But as Reaper looked at the family, he knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The man on the ground groaned, trying to stand, but Reaper wasn't done yet. He turned to the woman and the girl. "I'll make sure he's gone," he said, his voice low. They nodded, still processing what had just happened. As Reaper watched the man struggle to stand, he knew he had just stepped into something far deeper than he had anticipated. What would happen next would change the course of their lives forever. But for now, the block was silent, and the family was safe. The man Reaper had just thrown to the ground groaned, struggling to get up, his eyes bloodshot with fury. He was disoriented, but his rage was clear. For a brief moment, Reaper thought about walking away. The streets had gone silent, with every neighbor witnessing the scene unfolding in front of them. A few cautious glances peeked from behind windows, but no one dared to intervene. Reaper was the kind of man whose very presence intimidated, and the crowd knew it. He turned back to the family, his mind running through the consequences of what he had just done. He knew this wasn't going to be over easily. The man on the ground wasn't just a drunk. He was someone with a dangerous temper, someone who had probably hurt this family before. Reaper turned back to the woman and the little girl, his gaze softer than it had been moments before. The woman, still trying to regain her composure, slowly stood up, her hands trembling slightly as she steadied herself. She was in her mid-30s, her face showing signs of the life she had endured, deep lines that spoke of years of stress and hardship. But her eyes, though tired, shone with something else, relief. The little girl, now standing beside her mother, looked up at Reaper. Her wide eyes, still filled with fear, had softened. She wasn't sure what to make of him yet, but she had seen enough in those few moments to realize that this man wasn't a threat. He had protected them. She took a cautious step forward, her small hand reaching for her mother's. "Are we safe now?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Reaper nodded, the words coming out rough but reassuring. "You're safe now." His voice was gruff, but there was a tenderness to it that neither of them expected. The woman looked at him, her expression full of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Reaper nodded again, his gaze moving to the man still on the ground. He didn't have time to make small talk, and he certainly wasn't one for long conversations. The scene needed to be wrapped up. He turned to the man, who had finally gotten up, staggering on his feet. The rage in his eyes hadn't faded, but he was no match for Reaper. "Get out of here," Reaper growled, his voice low and threatening. "If you ever come near her again, I'll make sure you never walk this street again." The man sneered, wiping blood from his lip. But he knew better than to test a Hell's Angel. With one last look at the woman and child, he turned and stumbled away, muttering under his breath. Reaper watched him go, making sure he was truly leaving. When he was sure the danger was gone, he turned back to the family. The woman was now sitting on the porch steps, her head in her hands, tears streaming down her face. The little girl had her arms wrapped around her mother, but she was looking at Reaper. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice full of curiosity and something else, something that spoke of a child's innate ability to see the truth in people. Reaper hesitated for a moment. He wasn't used to explaining himself, especially not to a child. But there was something about the way she looked at him, something that made him feel like he could be vulnerable, even if only for a moment. "Just a guy who doesn't like seeing people get hurt," he said, his voice softer than he intended. The little girl seemed to accept this answer, nodding solemnly. She then gave her mother a gentle squeeze, and the woman looked up, wiping away the tears. "Thank you," she said again, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Reaper didn't respond. He wasn't one for speeches, especially when it came to things like, "thank you." But he felt something stir in him, a feeling he hadn't had in a long time. It was the feeling of doing something right. For once, he had been in the right place at the right time. He turned to leave, but as he walked back toward his Harley, he heard the little girl's voice again. "Are you coming back?" she asked. Reaper stopped, his hand resting on the handlebars of his bike. He didn't look back. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But if you need me, I'll be around." The words left him before he could stop them, and for a moment, he wondered if he meant them. But then he climbed onto his bike, started the engine, and rode off into the night, leaving behind the family he had just protected. The storm had passed, but Reaper knew that for this family, the storm wasn't over. They had a long road ahead of them. And so did he. As the night swallowed him whole, the only thing he could think about was what had happened tonight. For the first time in a long while, he felt something resembling peace. But he knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. Reaper's mind raced as he rode through the streets, the roar of his Harley's engine masking the turmoil swirling inside him. He had just walked away from a family, from a situation that he knew wasn't over, and yet, for some reason, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just about protecting them anymore. Something inside him had shifted, and he didn't know if he could go back to the cold, isolated life he had lived before. The wind cut against his face as he took a sharp turn, his bike weaving through the streets, but his thoughts kept returning to the woman and child he had just helped. The memory of the little girl's innocent face, her trust in him, lingered like a weight on his chest. He couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at him like that. But before he could dive deeper into his thoughts, the familiar hum of his bike pulled him back to reality. The streets were quieter now, almost eerily so, as if the town was holding its breath. He didn't know why, but something in the air felt different. As he turned the corner, he spotted a familiar figure standing in front of his garage. Rosie, an old acquaintance from the neighborhood, who often dropped by to chat. She was pacing back and forth, her face creased with worry. Reaper slowed down and pulled up to her, his boots hitting the pavement with a dull thud. "What's going on, Rosie?" he asked, removing his helmet and setting it on the bike. She looked up, her expression relieved but still tense. "It's that woman, the one you helped earlier," Rosie said, her voice low. "Her ex-husband, he's back. I saw him walking down the street not too long ago. He was asking around, looking for her." Reaper's heart sank. He had known this wasn't over. "I figured as much," he muttered under his breath. He had hoped that the man would stay gone, but his gut told him that wouldn't be the case. The violence and chaos that man had brought with him were far from finished. Rosie took a step closer, her eyes filled with concern. "You need to be careful, Jason," she warned, using his real name for the first time in a while. "You don't know who you're dealing with. That guy is trouble, and if he's looking for her, there's no telling what he might do." Reaper nodded. He had seen enough in his life to know that trouble rarely went away on its own. "I'll handle it," he said, his tone firm, though he wasn't entirely sure how. Rosie gave him a doubtful look, but didn't argue. "You're a good man, Jason," she said softly. "But don't go getting yourself hurt over this. It's not your fight." Reaper's eyes darkened. "It is now," he muttered. Without another word, he swung his leg back over his bike and revved the engine. As the roar of the Harley filled the quiet street, he knew what he had to do. The night was just beginning, and this time, he wouldn't be walking away. He rode through the dark streets, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows along the pavement. His mind was set on one thing, making sure that family was safe. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he wasn't about to let that man harm anyone else. The woman and her daughter had shown him a side of himself he thought he had long buried: compassion, tenderness, a willingness to protect. As he neared their house, he saw the man standing outside, his broad frame towering over the porch steps. He was drunk, again, stumbling as he shouted obscenities toward the door. Reaper's heart beat faster. He couldn't let this go on. He parked his bike at the end of the block, out of sight, and carefully approached the house, making sure to stay in the shadows. The man didn't hear him coming. He was too focused on yelling, his words slurring as he threatened to break down the door. Reaper moved closer, his boots silent against the pavement. He knew he had to act fast. If the man broke in, it could be too late. Without a second thought, Reaper lunged forward, grabbing the man by the collar and yanking him backward. The man's surprised shout was muffled by the force of the impact as he slammed into the ground. Reaper didn't give him a chance to recover. He grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. "You've been warned," Reaper growled, his voice a low, menacing whisper. The man's eyes widened in fear as he gasped for air. "Stay the hell away from her and the kid. You don't get to hurt them anymore." The man tried to fight back, but Reaper's grip was unyielding. "Please," the man croaked. "I didn't mean to." Reaper cut him off, his voice deadly. "You don't get to hurt people and then apologize. It's too late for that." With one final shove, he threw the man back onto the pavement, watching as he scrambled to his feet. The man's face was pale with fear now, and he stumbled away, his voice barely audible as he muttered curses. Reaper stood still, watching him retreat, making sure he didn't come back. Once the man was gone, he turned back to the house. The porch light flickered on, and the door creaked open. The woman appeared, her face pale but filled with relief. She saw Reaper standing at the end of the driveway and didn't need to ask. "Is it over?" she asked softly. Reaper nodded, his voice low. For now. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, they were safe. And that was all he could promise. The night had settled in with a quiet tension. Reaper sat on his bike, the roar of the engine now just a distant hum in his mind. The streets were empty, and the cold air stung his face as he pulled his helmet off. The fight was over, at least for now, but his thoughts were far from calm. He couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just about protecting them anymore. That family. He had become too involved, too attached, and he knew that the man he had just confronted wouldn't be the last threat they'd face. As he turned the key to shut off the bike, the soft glow of the porch light from the woman's house flickered in his peripheral vision. He hadn't expected them to come out again. The woman, her name was Sarah, appeared on the porch. Her face was no longer as weary as it had been before. There was a spark in her eyes now, a quiet gratitude mixed with something else, something he couldn't quite place. She stepped down the stairs and walked toward him, her small figure illuminated by the yellow light of the street lamps. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. "For tonight, for everything." Reaper didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure what to say. This wasn't just another situation where he could walk away and move on. No, something had shifted inside him, something he couldn't ignore. Sarah stood in front of him, her hands clasped together in front of her, eyes searching his face. "You don't have to do this," she added, almost as if she was reading his thoughts. "You've already done more than enough." Reaper glanced at her, then at the little girl standing just behind her, peering out through the doorway. Her eyes were wide, innocent, and full of wonder. He couldn't help but soften his gaze. "I know what you've been through," he said quietly, "but it's not over. Not yet. I won't let him hurt you again." Sarah hesitated, then nodded slowly, as though she understood. The girl stepped forward, her little hand reaching out to grab Reaper's sleeve. He looked down at her, surprised by her boldness. "Are you going to stay?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Reaper felt a pang in his chest. He wasn't used to this, being asked to stay. He had spent so many years alone, drifting from one fight to the next, never allowing anyone to get close. But now, in this moment, something inside him was cracking. "I don't know," he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. "But if you need me, I'll be around." The little girl smiled, and that small gesture pierced through the layers of armor he had built around himself. He wasn't sure what it was about her or her mother, but something told him that he couldn't just walk away. Sarah glanced down at her daughter, then back at Reaper. "We're going to be all right, aren't we?" she asked, her voice filled with a quiet hope. Reaper nodded, though doubt still lingered in his mind. "You will be. I won't let anything happen to you." With that, he turned and walked back to his bike, leaving behind a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. As the roar of the Harley's engine filled the air, he couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of something he couldn't escape. Something deeper than just a one-time rescue. Something that might change his life forever. He rode off into the night, the wind whipping through his hair, the weight of his own thoughts heavy on his shoulders. He had done what he could, but he knew deep down that the hardest part was yet to come. The man who had attacked Sarah and her daughter wouldn't forget this, and he would be back. Reaper had a feeling that it wouldn't be long before he'd have to face him again. And next time, there would be no holding back. The next few days passed with a tense quiet that Reaper couldn't shake. He kept his distance from Sarah and her daughter, but he never stopped thinking about them. He couldn't ignore the feeling that they were somehow connected to him now, like an anchor in a storm he didn't fully understand. Every time he passed their house, he'd glance toward the porch, half expecting to see them standing there, waiting for him. But they weren't there. It was as if the brief moments they had shared together had vanished into the quiet hum of the town. Reaper knew the calm wouldn't last, though. The man who had attacked them, the one he'd thrown to the ground, wasn't done. No, he'd be back. And when he did return, Reaper would be ready. He couldn't protect them forever, but he would give them a fighting chance. On the fourth day, just as Reaper was finishing up a repair on his bike, he heard the unmistakable roar of a car engine. It wasn't the usual quiet hum of passing traffic. This was loud, aggressive, and far too familiar. He stepped outside the garage, wiping his hands on a rag, and immediately spotted the black sedan, slowing to a stop at the end of the street. His stomach tightened. There was no mistaking it. The man was back. Reaper's instincts kicked in. He wasn't about to wait for the inevitable confrontation to come to him. He knew how dangerous this could get. He grabbed his jacket, slid his gloves on, and mounted his Harley with a sense of urgency that only came from knowing trouble was right around the corner. He revved the engine and tore down the street, the bike's roar cutting through the silence like a warning. As he reached the end of the block, he saw the man, stumbling out of his car, shouting angrily as he looked around, searching for someone. Reaper didn't waste time. He rode straight toward him, coming to a screeching halt just a few feet away. The man didn't see him coming until it was too late. Looking for someone? Reaper's voice was cold, like a warning shot. The man froze for a moment, his eyes narrowing in recognition. He took a step back, his hand instinctively reaching for something hidden under his jacket. Reaper's body tensed. He wasn't about to let this go any further. Without a word, he slid off his bike, moving toward the man with a purposeful stride. The man stepped back again, his hand still on the hidden weapon. "Stay the hell away from them," Reaper growled. The man laughed bitterly, pulling a knife from his jacket. You think you can stop me? He spat, his voice full of venom. You don't know who you're messing with. Reaper didn't flinch. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but he had made a promise. He wouldn't let this man hurt anyone again. The man lunged at him, the knife flashing in the streetlight. Reaper stepped to the side, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it with a force that made the man drop the knife instantly. The man stumbled backward, surprised by the speed and strength of the biker. Reaper didn't give him a chance to recover. He grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the side of the car, the impact knocking the wind out of the man. You're done, Reaper said, his voice low but full of authority. The man struggled, trying to break free, but Reaper's grip tightened. Stay the hell away from Sarah and her daughter, he warned. If I ever see you near them again, I'll make sure you regret it. The man's face twisted in anger, but there was fear in his eyes now. He knew he couldn't win this fight. With a grunt, he pushed himself away from Reaper, but not before spitting at him. You think this is over? It's just beginning. The man hissed, stumbling toward his car. Reaper didn't chase him. He stood there, watching the man drive off into the night. He knew the threat wasn't gone, not by a long shot. But for tonight, he had made his point. He turned around and started walking back to his bike when he heard the soft creak of a door. Behind him, Sarah stepped onto the porch, her face pale in the dim light. Her eyes locked onto Reaper, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, softly, she said, "Is it over?" Reaper looked at her, his mind racing with all the things he couldn't say. He nodded, though the doubt still lingered in his chest. For now, he said quietly. Sarah walked down the steps, her gaze never leaving him. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. Reaper's heart tightened. He didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded. He had done what he could, but he knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As he climbed onto his bike, Sarah's voice called out to him once more. Will you stay around? She asked, her voice full of uncertainty. Reaper hesitated, then looked back at her. I don't know, he said honestly. But if you need me, I'll be here. With that, he revved the engine and drove off into the night, leaving behind the family he had vowed to protect. But deep inside, he knew he couldn't walk away from this. Not anymore. The following week passed in a haze for Reaper. Each day seemed to blur into the next, the quiet town offering no escape from the tension that still hung in the air. He kept his distance, sticking to his routine of working on bikes and riding in the evenings to clear his head. But no matter how far he rode, he couldn't escape the feeling that something was brewing, something he couldn't ignore. Sarah and her daughter had stayed quiet, no visits, no phone calls, no signs that they needed him. The absence of them was almost more unsettling than their presence had been. Reaper found himself watching the house more than he'd like to admit, waiting for any sign of trouble. He knew he shouldn't care this much, but deep down, he knew something wasn't right. The man who had caused all the chaos was still out there, and it was only a matter of time before he'd come back to finish what he started. It was early one evening when Reaper's suspicions proved true. As he rounded the corner, coming back from a late-night ride, he spotted a familiar black car parked outside the house. His heart sank. The same car. The same man. The storm wasn't over. It had only just begun. Reaper's instincts took over. He didn't even think twice. He pulled off his bike, letting it idle in the driveway, and made his way toward the house, careful to stay in the shadows. As he approached the front porch, he saw the man standing there again, his hand raised to knock on the door. But before he could make a sound, Reaper was on him, grabbing him by the collar and shoving him back onto the porch. You don't get to come back here, Reaper growled, his voice as cold and hard as steel. The man's eyes widened in surprise, but there was no fear in them, just anger. You think you can stop me? You don't know who I am. The man spat, trying to push Reaper off him. But Reaper didn't budge. I know exactly who you are, Reaper said, his grip tightening. You're a coward, and I won't let you hurt them again. The man snarled, his hands reaching for something hidden in his jacket. Reaper saw the movement, his instincts kicking in just in time. With a swift motion, he disarmed the man, slamming him back against the porch railing. Don't even think about it, Reaper warned, his voice low but deadly. The man cursed under his breath, but he knew he was outmatched. He slumped against the railing, his chest heaving. You think you've won? This isn't over. You think you can stop me just because you threw me around like some ragdoll? You have no idea what you're messing with. The man sneered, wiping blood from his lip. Reaper's expression darkened. It is over. For you, anyway, he said, his tone final. You won't ever get near her or her daughter again. You're done. The man laughed bitterly. You really think you can scare me off? There are more of us, more than you can handle, he spat. Reaper's eyes narrowed. Then let them come, he said, his voice filled with quiet rage. I'll take every one of them down if I have to. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the tension thick in the air. The man finally broke the silence, his voice low and filled with venom. You won't be so lucky next time, he threatened, stumbling to his feet. We'll see about that, Reaper said, watching the man retreat. He didn't make a move to follow, but he knew this wasn't over. The man might be leaving now, but he would be back, and next time, he wouldn't be alone. As Reaper turned to leave, he heard the creak of the door opening behind him. Sarah stepped out onto the porch, her face pale but determined. Is it him? She asked quietly, her voice filled with both fear and relief. Reaper nodded, his jaw tightening. Yeah, it's him. And it's not over. He'll be back. Sarah's eyes flickered with a mix of emotions. She looked at Reaper for a long moment, as if weighing her words. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but strong. Thank you, she said, her voice shaking slightly. For everything. I don't know what we would have done without you. Reaper didn't know how to respond. The words felt foreign to him, something he hadn't heard in so long. He simply nodded, looking past her to the house behind her. Just stay inside. Keep your doors locked, he said, his voice low and serious. I'll be around. But I can't protect you if you don't protect yourselves. Sarah nodded, her expression grateful but still filled with worry. She stepped back inside, closing the door gently behind her. Reaper stood there for a moment longer, the weight of his promise heavy on his shoulders. He couldn't walk away from this, not now, not after everything that had happened. He knew the storm wasn't over. He had made a promise, and he would keep it. He wasn't sure what was coming next, but he knew he wasn't going to back down. As he walked back to his bike, the sound of the engine roaring to life seemed to echo through the quiet night, a reminder that he wasn't done yet. There was more to come, and he would be ready. The days following the confrontation were a blur of tense anticipation. Reaper didn't sleep well. Every noise outside, every creak in the floorboards, had him on edge. He knew that the man wasn't done, but he wasn't sure when or how he would strike next. He spent his days working on his bike, keeping to himself, but his thoughts were always on Sarah and her daughter. He hadn't seen them since that night, but he knew they were still out there. That night, as he finished his dinner, there was a knock at the door. Reaper froze for a second, his hand gripping the edge of the table. It was late, the kind of late where only trouble seemed to show up. He stood up and moved cautiously to the door, peering through the peephole. It was Sarah. His chest tightened. He wasn't sure what he expected, but this wasn't it. He opened the door, his eyes scanning the porch, then landing on her face. She looked worried, and there was something else there, something that told him she wasn't here for just a casual visit. Can I talk to you? She asked quietly, her voice trembling slightly. Reaper stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. Of course, come in, he said, his voice softening. Sarah stepped into the dimly lit room, her eyes scanning the space briefly before landing on him again. I'm sorry to disturb you so late, but I didn't know who else to go to. Reaper closed the door behind her, the sense of urgency in her tone not lost on him. What's going on? He asked, his voice serious now. It's my ex-husband, she said, her eyes welling up with tears. He's been threatening me again. I think he's coming for us, Jason. She paused, her lips trembling as she tried to hold back the tears. I can't keep running, but I don't know what to do. I need help. Reaper's heart clenched. He had suspected something was wrong, but hearing it out loud hit him harder than he expected. You're safe here, he said firmly, walking over to the table where he kept his gun. He checked it briefly before looking back at her. I won't let him hurt you. Sarah's face softened, her hands shaking slightly as she wiped a tear from her cheek. I don't want to keep putting you in danger, she whispered. But I don't know where else to turn. I don't have anyone else. Reaper walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder, trying to offer comfort in the only way he knew how. You've got me, he said, his voice low but steady. And I'll make sure you and your daughter are safe. No one's coming near you again, not while I'm here. She nodded, her eyes looking up at him with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know what We would have done without you. Reaper's gaze softened, but only for a moment. He couldn't afford to show weakness. The stakes were too high. The man who had been terrorizing her wasn't the kind to give up easily. Let's make sure he doesn't get the chance, Reaper said, turning away from her to grab his jacket. He could feel the tension building in the room, and he knew that this time, he wasn't just protecting them from a drunk or a thug. This man had nothing left to lose, and that made him dangerous. Sarah looked at him, her face pale but determined. What do we do now? She asked, her voice filled with resolve. Reaper put on his jacket and grabbed his keys. We prepare. We won't wait for him to come to us. I'm going to make sure he knows that if he wants a fight, he's going to get one. Sarah nodded again, stepping back as she watched him gather his things. I don't want to cause you any more trouble, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're not causing trouble, Reaper said, his voice hardening. This is my fight too now, and I'm not letting you go through this alone. He walked toward the door, opening it, then turning back to her one last time. Stay inside. Lock all the doors. If you hear anything, don't open the door until I'm back. Sarah's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, he saw a flash of fear there, but also trust. Be careful, she said softly. Reaper's lips twitched slightly. I will, he said, stepping out into the night. The streets were quieter than usual. The chill of the air cut through his leather jacket as he made his way to his bike. He wasn't sure how long it would take, but he knew this was it. He couldn't afford to wait. As he revved the engine, he knew he wasn't just fighting for Sarah and her daughter. He was fighting for his own redemption, for the chance to be the man he knew he could be, even if it meant facing the darkness head-on. The road stretched ahead of him, empty and dark, but for the first time in years, Reaper didn't feel like he was riding alone. Reaper's thoughts raced as he sped down the empty street, his bike growling beneath him. His focus was sharp, every instinct on high alert as he kept an eye on the rearview mirror. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew the man he had confronted would come back, and he wasn't alone. The quiet of the neighborhood felt like a trap. Every house he passed seemed to close in on him, as though the night was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He had to act fast. He had made promises to Sarah, and now he had to follow through. As he neared the old warehouse district, the engine of his bike echoed through the otherwise silent streets. Reaper's mind drifted back to the conversation with Sarah. The look in her eyes, the trust she had put in him, stirred something deep inside him. He wasn't the kind of man who usually got involved in anyone's problems, but something about this felt different. It felt personal. He had seen too much darkness in his life to let someone like Sarah and her daughter fall victim to it. The streetlights flickered as he made a sharp turn into the industrial area, his eyes scanning the shadows. He wasn't sure where the threat would come from, but he knew it wouldn't take long. He could feel it in his bones. He pulled up to a rundown building at the edge of the district, parking his bike behind a stack of crates. The place was deserted, no lights or movement anywhere. It was exactly the kind of place someone would hide out. Reaper's eyes narrowed. He knew this was the right spot. He dismounted, his boots hitting the pavement with a heavy thud. He took a moment to steady himself, his senses on high alert. He wasn't going in blind, but this felt like a showdown. There was no turning back. He moved swiftly, blending into the shadows as he approached the building. The windows were boarded up, but the door was slightly ajar. Reaper pushed it open slowly, the creak of the hinges barely audible in the stillness. Inside, it was dark, the smell of mildew and rust thick in the air. His hand went to the knife at his belt, the cold steel comforting in his grip. He took another step, listening for any sound that might give him a clue about what was waiting inside. That's when he heard it. A low voice, muffled but distinct. He froze, listening. He's here. I saw him coming. The voice was unfamiliar, but the tone was clear, hostile, and filled with malice. Reaper's heart raced. He wasn't just dealing with the man he had confronted. No, there was a group, and they had been waiting for him. They were preparing for something big. Reaper moved again, faster this time, stepping lightly on the gravel as he moved deeper into the building. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, scanning for movement. He could make out the shapes of crates and old equipment piled up in the corners, but there were no immediate threats in sight. Then, suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the building, followed by a string of curse words. Reaper's instincts kicked in. He sprang forward, ducking behind a large stack of crates as he tried to assess the situation. His heart pounded in his chest as he crouched low, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The voices grew louder, and then he saw them. 3 men, all armed. They were moving cautiously, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of him. Reaper's hand tightened around the knife. He wasn't going to wait for them to find him. He was going to take the fight to them. He darted out from behind the crates, moving like a shadow. One of the men saw him first, shouting in surprise as he raised his weapon. But it was too late. Reaper closed the distance between them in an instant, knocking the gun out of the man's hand before landing a powerful blow to his gut. The man stumbled back, gasping for air. Reaper didn't give him a chance to recover. He moved swiftly, knocking the man to the ground with a well-placed kick. The other 2 men were already moving toward him, but Reaper was faster. He ducked under a wild swing, grabbing the second man's arm and using his momentum to slam him into the wall. The man grunted in pain, but Reaper didn't stop. He didn't give them any room to regroup. The last man, the one who had been quiet all this time, charged at him with a knife of his own. Reaper barely had time to react as the blade came at him, but he parried it with his own knife, the clash of steel ringing through the building. The fight was quick and brutal, and within moments, Reaper had disarmed the man and forced him to the ground. He was breathing heavily, but his mind was still clear. He stood over the defeated men, his chest rising and falling with the effort. He wasn't done yet. There was still a job to do. He glanced around the room, his gaze landing on the faint outline of a door at the far end. He knew what was waiting behind it. He knew he had to finish this. He took a deep breath, wiped the sweat from his brow, and moved forward, ready for whatever came next. Reaper's hand tightened around the door handle as he approached the last room of the warehouse. His breath was steady, but his mind was alert. The fight with the 3 men had been brief, but the tension in the air told him that there was more to this than just a few hired goons. He had no idea who was behind this, but he was about to find out. He kicked open the door and stepped inside, his eyes scanning the dark room. A single bulb hung overhead, casting an eerie glow on the room's contents. Shelves filled with crates of unknown goods lined the walls, but what caught Reaper's attention wasn't the room's contents. It was the figure standing in the center of the room. A man in a suit, his hands clasped behind his back, was standing still as if waiting for him. The man didn't look scared. In fact, he looked calm, almost too calm. "You must be Jason," the man said, his voice smooth and cold. "The Hell's Angel who likes to play the hero." Reaper's muscles tensed, but he didn't move. "Who are you?" he growled, his voice low and controlled. The man smiled, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous confidence. "I'm someone who has a lot of questions, and you're going to help me answer them." Reaper stepped forward, his boots thudding against the concrete floor. "You've got 5 seconds to tell me who you are and what this is all about," he warned, his voice thick with threat. The man raised a hand, as if he wasn't intimidated by Reaper's stance. "I'm just someone who's interested in your little rescue mission," he replied, his smile never fading. "You've made quite an impression on Sarah and her daughter. They think they're safe. Now, don't they?" Reaper's blood ran cold. He didn't like where this was going. "What do you know about them?" he demanded, his voice tightening with anger. The man's smile widened. "I know enough. I know they've been running from a man like you. Someone who thinks they can fix everything with a fight. But you can't protect them forever, Jason. There are bigger forces at play here. Forces you can't fight with your fists." Reaper's hand went instinctively to the knife at his belt. He didn't know who this guy was, but he was sure as hell going to find out. "I'll take my chances," Reaper spat, stepping even closer. The man chuckled, his calm demeanor still unnerving. "You think you can take on everything that's coming for them? You don't know who you're dealing with." Reaper's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond. The man's words were getting under his skin, but he knew he couldn't let it show. "Sarah and her daughter have been under the radar for a long time," the man continued, his voice almost sympathetic. "They've been hiding from people like me, but now they're on the radar. And you," he paused, taking a step closer, "you've just made yourself a target." Reaper's mind raced, trying to piece together the situation. He had a gut feeling that this wasn't just about a single man causing trouble. It was bigger than that. "Who are you working for?" he demanded, his voice growing colder. The man took another step back, clearly amused by the question. "I think you know who I work for. People who don't like loose ends. People who don't like their business interrupted." Reaper clenched his fists. He didn't need to be told who this man worked for. He had seen it too many times in his own world. Criminals who thought they were untouchable. He had made a promise to protect Sarah and her daughter, and now that promise felt more dangerous than ever. "If you think I'm going to back down, you've got another thing coming," Reaper said, his voice low and deadly. The man's expression shifted, the amusement in his eyes replaced by something darker. "I don't need you to back down. I just need you to understand that this game you're playing is bigger than you. You're not the only one with connections. And when this is all over, you won't be standing." Reaper took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't going to let this man walk all over him. He had to end this, and he had to end it now. "You're not going to touch them," Reaper said firmly, his eyes locked onto the man's. "Not while I'm standing." The man tilted his head slightly, sizing him up, but he didn't make any moves. "We'll see," he said, his voice cold. "We'll see who's left standing when the dust settles." The air in the room thickened, the weight of the man's words hanging heavily in the silence. Reaper knew that this wasn't just about protecting a family anymore. This was bigger, and it was about to get a whole lot worse. But he wasn't backing down. He would do whatever it took to protect Sarah and her daughter, no matter what enemy he had to face. The man turned and began to walk toward the far corner of the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Reaper's eyes followed him, his mind working through the next steps. He had made his stand, but now, he had to be smarter. There were bigger forces coming, and it was time to prepare for the fight of his life. Reaper watched as the man walked away, his mind racing with the unsettling words he had just heard. It was clear now that this wasn't just a simple confrontation. It was a battle against something far bigger. He had no idea who this man really worked for, but the way he spoke made it clear that this was about far more than Sarah and her daughter. The people behind this weren't going to back down so easily. Reaper wasn't about to let them take control, not while he had a say in the matter. But for the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of what he was up against. This wasn't just about a man and a knife anymore. This was about a network, a system, and one wrong move could be the end of everything. He left the warehouse, the faintest traces of the man's words still echoing in his mind. The air was thick with tension as he made his way back to his bike, his mind set on one thing: protecting Sarah and her daughter. He couldn't afford to let his guard down now. As he revved the engine and sped down the dark streets, he knew he was about to face a war, and he was just one man. But one thing was certain: he wasn't going down without a fight. The ride back to his apartment was quick, but it gave him time to think. The man had been right about one thing. This wasn't just his fight. It had grown into something bigger, something that would require more than just his fists and a knife. Reaper didn't have the resources to go up against an entire network, but he knew people. He knew who to contact, who to trust, and that's where his next move would begin. When he arrived, he parked his bike behind the building, out of sight. The apartment was quiet when he entered, but it felt like a pressure cooker, as if everything was about to explode. He made his way to the phone and dialed a number. It rang once, then twice before a voice answered. "Yeah." The voice was rough, but familiar. Reaper's muscles relaxed just slightly. "It's me," he said. "I need your help." There was a pause on the other end. "What's going on?" the voice asked, the tone shifting from casual to serious. "I've gotten myself tangled up in something, and it's bigger than I can handle alone." He filled the man in quickly, explaining the situation with Sarah, her ex-husband, and the cryptic man who had confronted him in the warehouse. "You're not in this alone," the man on the other end said. "You're going to need more muscle, more than just me, but we can make this happen. You've got my back, and I've got yours." Reaper's hand gripped the phone tighter. "I'm counting on you," he said. "Make the calls. Get the guys together. We'll take this down, piece by piece." The man on the phone gave a low chuckle. "We'll make sure they regret coming after you. Don't worry. We're in this together." Reaper hung up the phone, his mind already shifting into the next phase of the plan. He had no intention of backing down now, but he knew that there was no going back. There was no chance to walk away from this fight. It had already found him. He went over his plan one more time, making sure every detail was in place. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. He would fight for Sarah, for her daughter, for anyone else who got caught in the crossfire of this network of criminals. The only thing he had to do now was wait. As the hours ticked by, Reaper stayed alert, keeping his eyes on every possible threat. He knew they'd come for him eventually, but he wasn't about to make it easy for them. He wasn't alone anymore. He had a team, and together, they were going to make sure that no one, especially someone like Sarah, was going to be forced into hiding again. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. His heart skipped a beat, but he didn't move. He wasn't expecting anyone. When the knock came again, louder this time, he stood and walked to the door. He didn't say a word as he opened it, his hand hovering over the gun he kept by the door. But it wasn't anyone he was expecting. It was Sarah, her face pale and anxious. "It's him," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "He's here. He's at my door." Reaper's blood ran cold. He grabbed his jacket and gun, his heart pounding in his chest. "Stay inside. Lock the door," he told her urgently. She nodded, stepping back into the apartment. Reaper slammed the door behind him and made his way to the stairs, his footsteps heavy with determination. This was it. They had crossed the line, and now there was no more running. It was time for the storm to hit. Reaper's heart raced as he stepped through the darkened alleyway, his boots hitting the wet concrete with a heavy thud. The cold night air cut through him, but the adrenaline surging through his veins made him ignore the chill. Sarah's warning had sent him into motion without hesitation. He knew this was the moment, the confrontation he had been preparing for, the one he couldn't avoid any longer. His thoughts were sharp, focused, and every instinct screamed that it was do or die. As he approached Sarah's building, he saw the faint light flickering in the window, casting shadows on the street below. He could feel the tension building, a knot in his stomach that refused to loosen. He stopped at the door, listening. The silence was thick, almost suffocating, but there was something off about it. His eyes darted around, scanning every corner of the street, every darkened doorway. The man had been watching, waiting, and Reaper was ready for whatever came next. He had to be. He couldn't let them hurt her. He knocked once, firmly, making sure the sound cut through the quiet. No response. He knocked again, louder this time. A sudden noise from inside startled him. A creak of the floorboards, a shift in movement. Then, the door slowly cracked open. Sarah's face appeared in the gap, her expression strained but relieved. "He's here," she whispered urgently, her eyes wide with fear. "He's at the door. I don't know how he found me, but he's here." Reaper didn't wait for another word. He pushed the door open wider, stepping inside and quickly scanning the room. It was dim, the only light coming from the flickering lamp in the corner. His gaze immediately landed on the locked door at the far end of the room, the one Sarah had bolted earlier in a desperate attempt to keep her daughter safe. "Stay with her," Reaper ordered, his voice low but firm. Sarah hesitated, her gaze flicking between him and the door. "Please, be careful." Her voice trembled, but there was a determination in her eyes. She wasn't backing down either. Reaper nodded briefly, and without another word, he moved toward the door. He was ready. He'd made sure he was prepared for this. But the weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. As he stood before the door, he could hear the muffled sound of footsteps on the other side. Someone was there. He could feel it. He didn't hesitate this time. He kicked the door open with a powerful force, his eyes scanning the dark room immediately. The man was there, standing near the back, his face twisted with rage. The moment he saw Reaper, he lunged forward, a knife in his hand, a snarl on his lips. But Reaper was faster. With a swift move, he sidestepped the attack, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it behind his back, forcing him to drop the knife with a loud clatter. The man cursed, but Reaper didn't let up. He slammed him into the wall with a thud, the force of the impact rattling the room. "You're done," Reaper growled, his grip tightening around the man's throat. The man struggled, but Reaper was too strong. "You think you can just walk in here and hurt her? Think again." The man's face flushed with anger and fear, but he managed to speak through gritted teeth. "You don't know who you're messing with," he spat. "This isn't over. You can't protect them. There's a whole network behind me." Reaper didn't flinch. He didn't care about the network, about the threats. He had already made his choice. "I don't need to know who's behind you," he said, his voice cold. "I only need to know that you won't hurt them again." The man's eyes flared with a mix of fury and desperation, but he knew he had lost. "This isn't over, biker," he hissed. Reaper's grip tightened for a moment longer, making sure the man understood the weight of his words. "It is for you," he said, releasing the man and watching him collapse to the ground. The fight was over, at least for now. The man groaned as he tried to get to his feet, but Reaper stepped back, pulling his phone from his pocket. He dialed a number he had memorized by heart. It was time to get help, to finish what had started. "This is Jason," he said when the phone picked up. "I need backup. Now. And make it quick." He paused, listening to the response. "I don't care how you do it. Just get here, and make sure he never comes back." He hung up without another word and turned to Sarah. She was standing in the doorway, her daughter's hand clutching hers, both of them watching him carefully. "It's over," he said, his voice softer now, though still filled with resolve. Sarah nodded slowly, her face filled with relief, though her eyes still held a trace of worry. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't know what to say." Reaper stepped forward, his expression softening just a little. "You don't have to say anything," he replied, his voice steady. "I made a promise, and I keep my promises." Sarah's lips trembled as she smiled, her hand tightening around her daughter's. The silence that followed was peaceful, but Reaper knew it wouldn't last. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. He had fought for them tonight, but there was more to come, and he would be ready. Reaper stood at the entrance of Sarah's apartment, his mind racing with everything that had happened. The man he'd confronted was lying low for now, but Reaper knew this wouldn't be the end. There were more threats out there, and the promise he had made to Sarah to protect her and her daughter weighed heavy on him. The silence in the room was unsettling, but it was a kind of quiet that held its own form of danger. He could sense the calm before the storm. He had done what he could to neutralize the immediate threat, but the words from that man, about networks, about things much larger than what he was currently dealing with, still echoed in his head. Sarah was still standing there, her daughter's hand tightly gripped in hers, both of them waiting for him to say something, anything, that would let them know that everything would be all right. But Reaper didn't know what to say. He had already given them his word. What more could he promise? The night had stretched on, the darkness outside reflecting the unknown future ahead. He turned to face Sarah. "You're safe for now," he said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. "But we need to be ready. They won't stop. Not until they get what they want." Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. "I know," she whispered. "I just don't want my daughter to see any more of this. I don't want her to live in fear." Reaper's gaze softened. He couldn't imagine what she had been through, the constant fear that had become her reality. He couldn't promise her peace, but he could offer her protection. "You won't have to," he said quietly. "Not as long as I'm here." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. But the worry in her eyes didn't completely fade. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Reaper hesitated. "We make a plan," he said finally. "I'm not going to leave you unprotected. We'll get more people involved, people I trust, and we'll make sure they can't touch you." But even as he said it, he knew that making plans wasn't enough. The world he had been dragged into wasn't one that could be solved with simple solutions. This wasn't about just protecting a family anymore. It was about taking down a system of people who were untouchable, and for the first time, Reaper wondered if he was in over his head. As he turned toward the door, ready to head back out and take the next step, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a text message from his old contact. "It's time," the message read. "Get ready." Reaper's heart skipped a beat. He had been expecting this moment, but now that it was here, he was unsure of what the next move should be. He looked at Sarah one last time before stepping out into the night. "Stay inside, keep the doors locked," he said, his voice low and commanding. "I'll be back soon." He didn't wait for a response. He didn't have time to. The moment he stepped outside, the cold air hit him like a slap, the sharp wind biting at his face. He climbed onto his bike, his mind already turning to what was ahead. The road stretched out in front of him, and even though he had no idea where it would lead, he knew it would bring him face to face with the kind of danger he had fought against all his life. The message had been clear. Whoever these people were, they were coming for him, and it was only a matter of time before they showed up on his doorstep. He revved the engine, speeding down the street, the familiar hum of the bike a reminder that he had faced worse before. But this time, it felt different. The stakes were higher. There was more to lose. As he approached the edge of town, he saw the familiar shadows of old warehouses looming in the distance. This was where the message had led him. The air was thick with tension, and the only sound was the growl of his bike as he slowed down. He parked behind a dilapidated building, making sure to stay out of sight. The street was empty, the silence almost oppressive. He got off the bike and moved toward the building's back in trance, his hand resting on the handle of his knife. He wasn't sure who he would face tonight, but he was ready for anything. He took a deep breath, and with one last look over his shoulder, he pushed the door open. Inside, the room was dark, but he could make out the shapes of several figures moving in the shadows. He didn't need to say a word. The tension in the room was enough. The moment they saw him, they knew who he was. They knew what he had done, and they knew this wasn't going to end easily. Reaper's hand moved to the knife, ready for whatever came next. His heart was steady, his mind clear. He had made his choice, and now he was going to fight for it. For Sarah, for her daughter, and for the chance to put an end to the danger that had followed them all the way here. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The warehouse was eerily quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. Reaper stood in the doorway, his heart pounding in his chest, but his mind was clear. He had come too far to turn back now. As he stepped further into the room, his boots making a quiet echo on the concrete floor, his eyes quickly adjusted to the dim light. Figures moved in the shadows, their presence silent, but not unnoticed. Reaper's hand instinctively went to the knife at his side, his fingers brushing against the cold steel. He had been prepared for this moment, but now that it was here, he felt the weight of what was to come. The figures in the shadows shifted, and one stepped forward, a man with a calm demeanor, but eyes full of malice. "I was wondering when you'd show up," the man said, his voice smooth, but edged with arrogance. "You think you can take us down, biker? You're just one man. You don't have the resources, the backing." Reaper didn't flinch. He didn't need to explain himself. The man didn't know who he was dealing with. "I've taken down bigger threats than you," Reaper said coldly, his voice low but steady. The man smirked, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "I don't know about that," he replied, his hand reaching for the gun tucked into his belt. Reaper moved first, quicker than the man could react. In a flash, he was on him, knocking the gun from his hand and slamming him into the wall with a force that left the man gasping for air. The others moved in, but Reaper was ready. He fought with everything he had, every punch, every kick, every strike calculated and precise. He wasn't going to let anyone stand in his way. The sound of bodies hitting the floor filled the air, but Reaper didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. Each blow was a message, each move a reminder that he wouldn't let anyone hurt Sarah or her daughter. The man who had stepped forward before now lay unconscious on the floor, his grip on power slipping away. Reaper stood over him, his chest rising and falling with each breath. The room had fallen silent once more, the fight over, but not the war. "Is that it?" Reaper asked, his voice cutting through the stillness. He turned toward the remaining figures in the room. "You're done. This ends tonight." The remaining men looked at each other, fear now clearly etched on their faces. They had underestimated him, and it had cost them. "This isn't over," one of them muttered under his breath, but Reaper didn't let him finish. He stepped forward, grabbing the man by the collar and lifting him off the ground. "It is now," Reaper said, his voice a low growl. He threw the man to the side and turned to the others, his eyes hard. "If you want to live, you leave. You don't come back. You don't hurt anyone else. You're done here." They didn't move at first, but the message was clear. They had no choice but to comply. One by one, they picked themselves up, casting wary glances at Reaper as they slowly backed out of the room. It was over, but Reaper knew better than to think it was truly finished. The battle had been won, but the war was still ongoing. As the last man disappeared into the shadows, Reaper took a deep breath. The adrenaline was starting to fade, but the weight of everything still lingered. He turned and walked toward the exit, his hand reaching for his phone. It was time to contact the people who had been waiting for this moment. The network they had been fighting wasn't going to give up easily, but Reaper had taken the first step. He had shown them that he wasn't someone they could push around. He wasn't done yet. When he reached his bike, he checked his phone, sending a quick message to his contact. "It's over for now, but this isn't the last we'll see of them. Be ready." He took a deep breath and mounted his bike, the engine roaring to life beneath him. As he sped off into the night, the weight of his promise still sat heavy in his chest. He had made a vow to Sarah and to her daughter, and he wasn't going to break it. He would protect them, no matter what it took. The road ahead was uncertain, but he wasn't afraid. He was ready for whatever came next. And this time, he wasn't alone.